The day my own mother served me with a $200,000 lawsuit for refusing to pay my stepbrother's mortgage was the day I realized blood doesn't always mean family, and sometimes the sweetest revenge comes from those who raised you. Now I know what you're thinking. How does a family dispute escalate to a six-figure lawsuit? Well, buckle up, because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory and more drama than a soap opera marathon. Sarah thought she had it all figured out. 28 years old, successful software engineer, beautiful condo, six-figure salary, and what she believed was a loving, supportive family. She had worked her absolute ass off to get where she was, paying her own way through college while her stepbrother Jake coasted through life on charm and excuses. Sarah saved every penny, built her career from the ground up, and thought that her family was proud of her achievements. Boy, was she wrong. One phone call, just one conversation, shattered everything she believed about loyalty, fairness, and what family actually means. But here's the thing about Sarah. She didn't just roll over and take it. No. What happened next is a masterclass in calculated revenge that had the entire Reddit community standing up and applauding. By the end of the story, you'll witness the most methodical, surgical takedown of family manipulation you've ever seen in your life. We're talking about revenge so sweet, so perfectly executed, that it makes Game of Thrones look like a children's bedtime story. Trust me when I say the karma that comes around is absolutely chef's kiss perfect. Now, I'm going to tell you something right up front. Wait until you hear what Sarah discovers at the 45-minute mark of the story. I'm talking about information that will make your jaw hit the floor so hard you'll need a chiropractor. It's the kind of revelation that explains not just why her mother thought she could get away with this lawsuit, but why filing that lawsuit was literally the biggest mistake her mother ever made in her entire life. The evidence Sarah uncovers is so damning, so absolutely nuclear, that it doesn't just destroy her mother's case, it obliterates her entire world. Welcome back to DR Family Tales, where we dive deep into the most incredible Reddit stories of family drama, betrayal, and ultimate justice. I'm talking about the kind of stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty, and make you realize that sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones who'll stab you in the back the deepest. We specialize in bringing you the most jaw-dropping tales of entitled relatives, manipulative parents, and toxic family dynamics that end with the most satisfying comeuppance you've ever witnessed. If you live for stories where entitled family members get exactly what they deserve, and I mean exactly what they deserve, smash that subscribe button right now, because you're about to become addicted to this channel. Today's nuclear family explosion comes straight from our /entitled parents, and let me tell you, this is a doozy that had over 50,000 upvotes and more awards than a Hollywood ceremony. We're talking about a story so outrageous, so perfectly crafted for revenge, that it reads like fiction but is absolutely 100% real. The original poster provided screenshots, legal documents, and updates that had the entire Reddit community invested in this family war from start to finish. This isn't just family drama, this is a masterpiece of strategic warfare disguised as a lawsuit. Now let me introduce you to our protagonist, Sarah. 28 years old, software engineer pulling in a solid $85,000 annually, and absolutely everything you'd want in a daughter. I'm talking about the kind of person who remembers birthdays, helps elderly neighbors with their groceries, and has never once asked her family for money. Sarah is responsible to a fault, generous to everyone around her, and fiercely independent in the best possible way. She's the type who would rather work 3 jobs than ask for help, and trust me, that work ethic is going to become crucial to the story. But to understand how we got to a $200,000 lawsuit, we need to go back to Sarah's childhood and the family dynamics that created this absolute disaster. Sarah's parents divorced when she was 12 years old, and honestly, it was probably for the best, because her father was a piece of work who disappeared from her life faster than a magician's rabbit. Her mother, Linda, raised her as a single mom for 4 years, and during that time, Sarah learned that if she wanted something, she better figure out how to get it herself. No handouts, no excuses, just pure determination and elbow grease. When Sarah turned 16, her mother remarried a man named Ron, who seemed decent enough on the surface. Ron brought his 14-year-old son Marcus into their blended family, and this is where things started to get interesting. Now, I want you to pay close attention to this family dynamic because it's going to explain everything about how we ended up with a lawsuit that would make a divorce lawyer weep with joy. From day one, there were red flags bigger than the ones at a communist parade. Marcus got a brand new car for his 16th birthday. Not a used Honda Civic or a beat-up pickup truck, but a legitimate new car with all the bells and whistles. Sarah, on the other hand, worked part-time at a local grocery store to save up for a 15-year-old Toyota Corolla that had more miles on it than a trucker's logbook. When Sarah asked why Marcus got a new car while she had to work for hers, Linda's response was that Ron wanted to make sure Marcus felt welcomed in their new family. Apparently, making Sarah feel valued didn't require the same financial investment. But the car situation was just the appetizer in this feast of favoritism. The main course came when it was time for college. Sarah had been an honor roll student throughout high school, participated in debate team, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and had dreams of studying computer science. She had been told since middle school that there was a college fund waiting for her, money that her mother had been setting aside for years. Marcus, meanwhile, was a C student who spent more time playing video games than studying and had shown zero interest in higher education until suddenly, magically, he decided he wanted to go to college too. Here's where things get absolutely insane. When Sarah applied for financial aid and went to access her college fund, she discovered that it had mysteriously run out. $20,000 that was supposed to be earmarked for her education had somehow evaporated into thin air. But Marcus got a full ride to a private college that cost $30,000 a year. When Sarah confronted her mother about this mathematical impossibility, Linda claimed that the college fund had been smaller than expected, and they had to make difficult choices about how to allocate the money. So Sarah did what Sarah always did. She figured it out herself. She took out student loans, worked 2 part-time jobs throughout college, lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, and graduated with a degree in software engineering and $40,000 in debt. Marcus, meanwhile, partied his way through college on his parents' dime, changed majors 3 times, and barely graduated with a communications degree that he's never once used. Now let me introduce you to the supporting characters in this family drama, because they're all going to play crucial roles in what happens next. First, we have Linda, Sarah's mother, who is 52 years old and works as a real estate agent. Linda has perfected the art of playing the victim in every situation. No matter what goes wrong, it's never Linda's fault. It's either circumstances beyond her control or someone else's responsibility to fix it. She's the kind of person who could burn down her own house and somehow make it your problem. Then there's Ron, the stepfather, who is 54 and the definition of a passive enabler. Ron isn't malicious like Linda, but he's so conflict avoidant that he just goes along with whatever Linda wants rather than stand up for what's right. He's the human equivalent of Switzerland, permanently neutral and absolutely useless when you need someone to take a stand. Marcus, the stepbrother at the center of this financial hurricane, is 26 years old and has never held a job for more than 6 months in his entire adult life. He calls himself an entrepreneur, which is millennial speak for unemployed but with delusions of grandeur. Marcus has tried everything from cryptocurrency trading to drop shipping essential oils to starting a podcast about conspiracy theories. None of these ventures have ever made him a single penny, but his parents continue to fund his lifestyle while he chases the next get-rich-quick scheme. And finally, we have Jessica, Sarah's best friend since college, who serves as both the voice of reason and a crucial witness to everything that's about to unfold. Jessica is the friend everyone needs, the one who tells you the truth even when you don't want to hear it, and the one who has your back when the world goes insane. After college, Sarah moved out and built an incredible life for herself. She landed a fantastic job at a tech company, worked her way up through sheer talent and dedication, and managed to pay off her student loans in just 5 years. She's been saving aggressively for a house down payment and has managed to accumulate $50,000 in her savings account, money she earned through countless hours of overtime, side projects, and living below her means. For the past few years, Sarah has maintained minimal contact with her family. She shows up for major holidays, sends birthday cards, and keeps conversations surface level and brief. She learned early on that the less her family knew about her financial situation, the better, because Linda had a habit of turning every family gathering into a subtle interrogation about Sarah's income and expenses. Everything seemed manageable, keeping them at arm's length. Sarah had built boundaries that protected her peace of mind and her wallet. She thought she had successfully navigated the minefield of family dysfunction and could continue living her life without getting sucked back into their drama. But then came the phone call that changed everything. A single conversation that would shatter Sarah's carefully constructed distance and drag her into a family war that would make the Hatfields and McCoys look like a gentle disagreement over a property line. This phone call wasn't just going to ask for money, it was going to demand it, threaten for it, and ultimately sue for it in a way that would expose every ugly truth about this family's twisted priorities. The phone call came on a Thursday evening while Sarah was enjoying a quiet dinner after a long day of debugging code and attending client meetings. She saw her mother's name on her phone screen and honestly considered letting it go to voicemail because Linda never called just to chat. There was always an agenda, always some drama that needed Sarah's attention or advice. But Sarah had been raised to respect her mother, so she answered on the fourth ring with a cautious, "Hey, Mom, what's going on?" What happened next was a masterclass in emotional manipulation that would make a soap opera writer jealous. Linda was in full-blown tears, and I'm talking about the kind of crying that makes your voice shake and your words barely comprehensible. She was sobbing about how the family was falling apart, how she didn't know what they were going to do, and how she was so scared about losing everything they'd worked for. Sarah's immediate reaction was concern because despite everything, this was still her mother, and hearing someone you love in genuine distress triggers every protective instinct you have. Through the tears and dramatic pauses, Linda managed to explain that Marcus was in serious financial trouble. He was 3 months behind on his mortgage payments, and we're talking about a $2,800 monthly mortgage payment that he apparently hadn't been able to make since February. The bank had sent a foreclosure notice, and Marcus had exactly 30 days to come up with the back payments plus penalties or lose the house entirely. Linda painted this picture of Marcus as this tragic figure who had been trying so hard to make ends meet but just couldn't catch a break in the current economy. Now, here's where Sarah's analytical mind started kicking in because the math wasn't mathing, as the kids say these days. Sarah knew that Marcus had bought this house about 2 years ago, right around the time she had started making serious money at her tech job. But she also knew that Marcus's employment history was spottier than a Dalmatian with chickenpox. So while Linda was going on about how devastating this foreclosure would be for poor Marcus, Sarah was doing some quick mental calculations and realizing that something was seriously wrong with this picture. Sarah started asking questions, innocent questions at first, just trying to understand the full scope of the situation. And boy, did she get more information than she bargained for. It turns out that Marcus had somehow managed to qualify for a mortgage on a $380,000 house. Let that number sink in for a minute. $380,000. This wasn't some modest starter home or a fixer-upper in a questionable neighborhood. This was a legitimate house in a nice subdivision with granite countertops and a 2-car garage. How exactly does someone with no steady employment history qualify for a mortgage on a house that expensive? Well, according to Linda's tearful explanation, Marcus had been working as a social media consultant for various small businesses. Now, Sarah knew enough about social media consulting to know that unless you're working for major corporations or have a massive client base, you're probably making pocket change. Marcus was maybe, and I stress maybe, pulling in $200 a month on a good month from his so-called consulting business. So we have Marcus, who makes about $2,400 a year if he's lucky, somehow qualifying for a mortgage that requires nearly $34,000 annually just in house payments, not counting insurance, taxes, utilities, or any other living expenses. The math was so absurd that Sarah actually asked Linda to repeat the numbers because she was sure she had misheard something. But Linda was so focused on the emotional manipulation that she completely glossed over these logical inconsistencies. She kept redirecting the conversation back to how scared she was, how Marcus was such a good person who deserved better, and how the family needed to come together during this crisis. She painted this picture of Marcus as a victim of circumstances beyond his control, rather than someone who had made a series of spectacularly poor financial decisions. Sarah's initial sympathy started to curdle into suspicion when Linda seamlessly transitioned from describing the problem to presenting the solution. Without missing a beat, Linda suggested that Sarah should help family with her savings. Not suggested. Mind you, Linda presented this as if it was the obvious, natural next step in the conversation. She mentioned that she knew Sarah had been doing well at her job and had been saving money, and wouldn't it be wonderful if Sarah could step up and help Marcus get back on his feet? Now, Sarah had never told her family exactly how much she had saved, but Linda seemed to have a suspiciously accurate idea of Sarah's financial situation. This raised red flags bigger than the ones at a Chinese military parade because it meant that Linda had been keeping tabs on Sarah's finances despite their minimal contact. Sarah realized that those casual questions about her job and her living situation during family gatherings hadn't been innocent small talk. They had been intelligence-gathering missions. Sarah's gut instinct was screaming, "Trap," louder than a smoke detector with a dying battery. Every rational part of her brain was telling her that this entire situation was engineered to extract money from her savings account. But family guilt is a powerful drug, and Linda was dealing it with the skill of a seasoned pharmaceutical sales rep. She kept emphasizing how Sarah was the only one in the family who was financially stable, how Marcus would be forever grateful, and how this was what family members do for each other in times of need. The guilt trip was so expertly crafted that Sarah almost fell for it. Almost. Because Sarah had learned early in life to ask the hard questions before making any financial commitments. So she asked what seemed like a reasonable question. "How much help are you and Ron providing?" The silence that followed was so long and so telling that Sarah could practically hear the gears grinding in Linda's head as she tried to figure out how to answer without revealing the truth. When Linda finally responded, her voice had changed from desperate and tearful to defensive and slightly irritated. She explained that she and Ron were already helping in other ways. They were providing emotional support. They had co-signed for the original mortgage, and Ron had been helping Marcus with some home improvement projects. But when Sarah pressed for specifics about actual financial contributions, Linda got increasingly evasive. She claimed that they were both on tight budgets themselves, that Linda's real estate commissions had been down lately, and that Ron's salary from his job at the county wasn't enough to cover their own expenses plus help with Marcus's mortgage. She painted them as financially strapped despite the fact that they had somehow managed to help Marcus qualify for a mortgage he clearly couldn't afford. This is when Sarah realized the true scope of this family scam. Linda and Ron weren't asking Sarah to contribute to a family effort to help Marcus. They were asking Sarah to single-handedly solve a problem that they had helped create. They had co-signed for a mortgage that Marcus couldn't afford, probably knowing full well that he'd never be able to make the payments consistently, and now they wanted Sarah to be the financial safety net that kept their poor decision-making from catching up with them. But the revelation that made Sarah's blood boil wasn't just that they expected her to pay for their mistakes. It was the realization that this had probably been the plan all along. Sarah started thinking back to all those casual questions about her income, all those comments about how proud they were of her success, all those hints about how nice it must be to have so much disposable income. They hadn't been celebrating her achievements. They had been evaluating her as a potential funding source for Marcus's lifestyle. Sarah wasn't being asked to help family in a crisis. She was being positioned as the family ATM, expected to dispense cash on demand to cover the financial consequences of everyone else's poor choices. The foreclosure threat was real enough, but the crisis had been manufactured through years of enabling Marcus's irresponsible behavior and expecting someone else to pay for it when the bills came due. When Linda's answer revealed that she and Ron were contributing exactly $0 to solving this mortgage crisis while expecting Sarah to potentially drain her entire savings account, Sarah realized she wasn't just dealing with a family emergency. She was dealing with a coordinated financial manipulation that had been in the works for years, and the phone call wasn't a plea for help. It was the opening move in what would become the most expensive mistake her family ever made. After that phone call, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Linda's words, analyzing every pause, every deflection, every carefully crafted emotional manipulation. Something was rotten in Denmark, and Sarah's engineering brain wouldn't let her rest until she figured out exactly what kind of con game her family was trying to run on her. So she did what any rational person would do when faced with a financial crisis that doesn't add up. She started investigating. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work. Not because she was actually ill, but because she needed a full day to dig into this mortgage situation and figure out what was really going on. She started with the basics, asking herself the kinds of questions that Linda had either avoided or answered evasively during their conversation. How exactly had Marcus qualified for this mortgage? What was the timeline of his financial troubles? And most importantly, what weren't they telling her? Sarah's first move was to call Linda back with what she presented as innocent follow-up questions. She played the role of the concerned sister who just wanted to understand the full scope of the problem before figuring out how to help. Linda, thinking she had Sarah hooked, was more than happy to provide additional details, apparently believing that the more desperate the situation sounded, the more likely Sarah would be to open her wallet. This is where Linda made her first major mistake. In her eagerness to paint Marcus as a victim of circumstances, she revealed information that completely contradicted the story she had told the night before. Linda mentioned that she and Ron had been helping Marcus get established in his home for the past 2 years, which was interesting because the night before, she had claimed they couldn't afford to help with the current crisis. When Sarah pressed for specifics about what helping him get established meant, Linda reluctantly admitted that she and Ron had refinanced their own house to help Marcus with the down payment. Think about that for a moment. Linda and Ron had taken out a new mortgage against their paid-off home to give Marcus the money he needed to buy a house he couldn't afford. This wasn't just enabling, this was financial suicide with extra steps. But wait, it gets better. As Sarah continued her gentle interrogation, she discovered that Marcus had never actually made a full mortgage payment entirely on his own. Not once. For the entire 2 years he had owned this house, Linda and Ron had been subsidizing his mortgage payments to the tune of about $1,500 per month. So Marcus was responsible for roughly $1,300 of his $2,800 mortgage, and even that reduced amount was apparently too much for his social media consulting income to handle. Sarah started doing the math, and the numbers were absolutely staggering. Linda and Ron had been paying $18,000 per year to keep Marcus in a house he couldn't afford, plus whatever they had borrowed against their own home for his down payment. We're talking about a financial commitment that was probably close to $70,000 or $80,000 over 2 years, all so Marcus could play house in a neighborhood that was way beyond his means. This revelation completely reframed the current crisis. Marcus wasn't 3 months behind on his mortgage because of some sudden financial hardship or economic downturn. He was behind because Linda and Ron had finally hit their own financial breaking point and couldn't continue subsidizing his lifestyle. The foreclosure threat wasn't the result of Marcus's business failing. It was the inevitable result of a 2-year financial house of cards finally collapsing. But Sarah wasn't done digging. She started asking pointed questions about Marcus's job search and his efforts to increase his income. Surely, she reasoned, someone facing foreclosure would be doing everything possible to find steady employment. Linda's response to these questions was a masterclass in deflection and excuse-making that would make a politician proud. According to Linda, Marcus was actively looking for opportunities, but the job market was tough, and he didn't want to take just any job because it might interfere with his consulting business that was just about to take off. She painted this picture of Marcus as someone who was being strategically selective about his career moves rather than desperately trying to avoid losing his house. Sarah's bullshit detector was going off like a fire alarm in a fireworks factory. Something about Linda's description of Marcus's job search efforts didn't ring true. So Sarah decided to do a little social media stalking to see what Marcus had actually been up to during these months of supposed active job hunting. What she found was absolutely mind-blowing. Marcus's Instagram and Facebook accounts showed a lifestyle that was completely inconsistent with someone facing financial hardship. We're talking about pictures of expensive dinners, weekend trips, new electronics, and what appeared to be a pretty active social life that definitely required disposable income. But the real kicker was a series of posts about day trading and cryptocurrency investments that painted a very different picture of where Marcus's money, or rather his parents' money, had actually been going. Through some careful social media investigation and a few strategic questions to mutual acquaintances, Sarah discovered that Marcus hadn't been using the money his parents gave him for mortgage payments to actually make mortgage payments. Instead, he had been day trading with it, convinced that he could make enough profit to cover his mortgage and have money left over for his lifestyle. This wasn't just financial irresponsibility, this was gambling with his parents' retirement security. And of course, because Marcus had about as much business sense as a goldfish, he had lost approximately $15,000 of his parents' money in various trading schemes over the past 6 months. $15,000 that was supposed to keep him in his house had instead disappeared into the digital ether of failed cryptocurrency investments and poorly timed stock trades. Sarah was absolutely livid. Not only was her family trying to manipulate her into bailing out Marcus's mortgage, but they were doing it to cover gambling losses that he had incurred while pretending to be a responsible homeowner looking for work. The level of deception and financial irresponsibility was so staggering that Sarah actually had to take a walk around her neighborhood to process what she had discovered. But Sarah wasn't the type to make decisions when she was angry. She called her best friend Jessica to talk through what she had learned and figure out her next move. Jessica had been Sarah's voice of reason throughout college and had witnessed firsthand the family dynamics that Sarah was dealing with. When Sarah explained what she had discovered, Jessica's response was immediate and unequivocal. "You need to dig deeper. This is just the tip of the iceberg." Jessica had always been suspicious of Sarah's family's financial priorities, and she had a theory that there was even more to this story than what Sarah had already uncovered. She encouraged Sarah to find out everything she could about the family's financial situation before making any decisions about whether or how to help. Jessica's reasoning was sound. If Sarah was going to be asked to invest her life savings in this situation, she deserved to know exactly what she was getting into. That's when Sarah remembered that her coworker Mike worked in real estate before transitioning to tech. Mike had connections in the industry and access to public records that could help Sarah get a clearer picture of her family's financial situation. When Sarah explained what she needed, Mike was more than happy to help. He had heard enough stories about family financial drama to understand the importance of getting the full picture before making any commitments. Mike's investigation revealed information that made everything Sarah had already discovered look like small potatoes. The public records showed a pattern of financial decisions that was so reckless it bordered on criminal negligence. We're talking about multiple refinances, second mortgages, and equity loans that painted a picture of a family that had been living beyond their means for years. But the most damning discovery was the timeline of when these financial decisions had been made. Most of Linda and Ron's debt had been incurred around the time that Sarah had started making good money at her tech job. It was as if they had been using Sarah's success as collateral for their own financial speculation, assuming that their high-earning daughter would eventually be available as a safety net when their house of cards inevitably collapsed. Sarah realized that this wasn't just about Marcus's mortgage. This was about a family that had been making financial decisions based on the assumption that Sarah's success belonged to all of them. They had been spending money they didn't have and taking risks they couldn't afford because they believed that Sarah would ultimately be responsible for cleaning up the mess. Instead of confronting the family immediately with what she had discovered, Sarah made a strategic decision that would ultimately save her from becoming their permanent ATM. She decided to gather every possible piece of evidence about this financial house of cards before revealing her hand. She wanted documentation of every lie, every manipulation, and every financial decision that had led to this crisis. Sarah spent the next week conducting what amounted to a forensic financial investigation of her own family. She pulled credit reports, researched property records, analyzed social media posts, and even spoke to a few family friends to get a clearer picture of what had been going on behind the scenes. What she discovered was a level of financial dysfunction that made her realize this mortgage crisis was just the beginning of what her family would expect her to fund. This investigation is about to reveal some absolutely wild financial irresponsibility that goes far beyond what Sarah initially suspected. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this all unfolds, because what Sarah discovers next is going to completely change not just how she handles this situation, but how she views her relationship with her family forever. The evidence Sarah compiled during this investigation phase was going to become the foundation for the most epic family takedown in Reddit history. She was building a case that would not only protect her savings account, but would expose years of manipulation and financial abuse that had been flying under the radar. And trust me, when Sarah finally reveals what she's learned, the confrontation is going to be absolutely nuclear. You know, there's always this strange silence before chaos, like the air right before a thunderstorm. You can smell the rain, you can feel the electricity crawling across your skin, but on the surface, everything looks calm, almost normal. That's exactly where Sarah found herself. Outwardly, she was still the good daughter, the one who answered phone calls, smiled politely at Sunday dinners, and promised she was thinking about it. But inside, she was laying out blueprints for war. Because the more she connected the dots, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-time emergency. No. This was a pattern, a lifetime pattern. She had been groomed, conditioned, from the time she was a teenager to believe she was the responsible one, the provider, the fixer. While Marcus coasted on excuses and got bailed out for every screw-up, Sarah was the safety net. She worked, she saved, she sacrificed, and every time she took a step forward, her family positioned themselves to take a slice of it. And here's the thing, Sarah was an engineer. She lived and breathed patterns, bugs in a system, loops in code, feedback cycles that repeated endlessly. Once she recognized the pattern in her family dynamic, she couldn't unsee it. Every past memory came flooding back. The car Marcus got for free while she scraped together change for a rust bucket. The college fund mysteriously gone when it was her turn, but magically available when Marcus decided he wanted to go. Every guilt trip, every subtle nudge, every so-called family crisis that somehow landed squarely on her shoulders. It wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. It was systematic. Silence. Thick, heavy, suffocating silence. For a split second, the family dynamic cracked, and you could almost see them searching for their script. Because for the first time in years, Sarah wasn't playing her role. Linda's face went red first. She blinked rapidly, her lips trembling, and then, just like clockwork, the explosion came. How dare you? She hissed, her voice trembling with outrage. After everything this family has done for you, how dare you turn your back on us now? Ron shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing, his eyes fixed on the table as if the grain of the wood was suddenly fascinating. And Marcus had the audacity, the gall to laugh. He leaned forward, smirking, and spat out the words, "Wow. You really are selfish, Sarah. Guess you're not a real sister after all." That was the trigger. The moment the years of pent-up injustice snapped into focus. But Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam the table. She didn't cry. No, she pulled out her folder. A thick, organized stack of papers she had spent weeks compiling. And with surgical precision, she began to dismantle the fantasy her family had built. "Let's talk about selfishness, shall we?" she said, flipping open the folder. For the past 2 years, Marcus has lived in a house he couldn't afford. And do you know how he managed to stay in that house? With over $67,000 in subsidies from you too. Money that was supposed to be for retirement, for emergencies, for the future. And while Marcus was being handed every bailout imaginable, I got nothing. Not a dime. I worked my way through college, took on debt, lived on ramen noodles, while he played house with granite countertops. She slid the first sheet across the table. Bank records showing transfers from her mother's account to Marcus's mortgage lender. Then text messages where Linda herself admitted they were covering his payments just until things stabilized. Public property records, refinance documents, a timeline of 2 years' worth of proof that Marcus wasn't a victim, he was a parasite. And the best part, Sarah's voice never wavered. Calm, measured, clinical, like a surgeon cutting out a tumor. Linda, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her hands shook as she shoved the papers away. Her voice rose to a shriek. "This is not about records or money, Sarah. This is about family loyalty. Families sacrifice for each other. Families stick together no matter what." Sarah tilted her head, her calmness like a mirror reflecting Linda's hysteria. "You mean families like when you emptied my college fund to send Marcus to a private school? Or when you asked me to cover his car insurance while I was still paying off my student loans? That kind of loyalty." The cracks were widening, and Linda knew it. So she pivoted, just as Sarah expected, from rage to tears in an instant. Her voice broke, and she clutched her chest like she was auditioning for a soap opera. "Your father would be ashamed of you," she wailed. "Ashamed. We sacrificed everything for you kids, and this is how you repay us." Ron muttered something under his breath, maybe a weak attempt to de-escalate, but it was drowned out by Marcus, who leaned forward again, sneering. "You've got money, Sarah. You're just hoarding it because you don't care about anyone but yourself. You should be grateful you're in a position to help. Grateful." That word almost made Sarah laugh. Grateful that she had clawed her way to success, while they had sabotaged her at every turn. Grateful that her family saw her only as a walking wallet. Sarah leaned back in her chair, eyes locked on Marcus. "You want to talk about gratitude? You've been handed more in 2 years than I ever had in my entire life. And you squandered it. All of it. And now you expect me to clean up the mess? Not going to happen." The room was chaos now, Linda crying, Marcus shouting, Ron shrinking further into silence. Every manipulative trick in their playbook was hitting the table. Guilt, shame, anger, even the old, "we did everything for you" routine. But here's the thing about manipulation. It only works if the target plays along. And Sarah wasn't playing anymore. She stood, gathering her papers back into the folder with the calm of someone who already knew she had won. "I don't owe you anything," she said softly. "Not 1 cent. Not one explanation more. I came here tonight to say it to your faces. I will not be your safety net. I will not be your scapegoat. And I will not be your bank." The silence that followed was thick with rage and desperation. And just when you thought Linda had exhausted every trick, just when it seemed like the battle was over, she pulled out one more card. A card so outrageous, so utterly unhinged, that it didn't just fail to sway Sarah, it sealed Linda's fate. It gave Sarah all the ammunition she needed to take this family war nuclear. Because Linda's next move? Oh, it wasn't just manipulation. It was escalation. And it was the biggest mistake she would ever make. When people talk about karma, they usually mean it in that vague, hopeful way, like, one day, life will catch up to them. But Sarah didn't wait for karma. She built it. She engineered it with surgical precision, turning years of guilt, manipulation, and gaslighting into a weapon. And when the time came, she didn't hesitate. The first strike came when Linda crossed the line from manipulation to madness. She actually filed a lawsuit against her own daughter. Not for breach of contract, not for theft, not for anything that could even remotely stand in court. No, Linda filed a claim arguing that Sarah had a moral obligation to financially support her stepbrother. Imagine the delusion it takes to believe you can drag your daughter into court for refusing to pay another grown adult's mortgage. Sarah, of course, didn't even flinch. She handed the paperwork to her lawyer, the same one who had told her from the beginning that she had zero obligation. And with the calm efficiency of a surgeon, he dismantled the entire thing. He didn't just get it dismissed, he filed a countersuit for harassment and legal fees. When the judge read through the case, he didn't just see a baseless claim, he saw a parent weaponizing the legal system to coerce her own child. The ruling was swift. Case dismissed. And Linda, instead of draining Sarah's savings, she found herself writing a check for thousands of dollars to cover Sarah's attorney fees. It was the first taste of poetic justice. But Sarah didn't stop there. Winning in court was one thing, but the real battle was the story, the years of twisted lies that had painted her as the selfish daughter. So Sarah did something that would change everything. She told the truth. Publicly. She took her carefully compiled receipts, screenshots of messages, copies of bank transfers, the timeline of Marcus's endless bailouts, and laid it all out in one long, devastating post. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't rant. She simply told the story as it happened, from the stolen college fund to the sham mortgage to the lawsuit that blew up in Linda's face. The internet lit up. Support poured in by the thousands. Strangers rallied behind her, calling her strength inspiring, her composure admirable. And the ripple effect hit Linda harder than any courtroom loss could. Because Linda wasn't just a manipulative parent, she was a real estate agent. Her business depended on her reputation. And suddenly, potential clients were seeing her name tied to stories of financial abuse, entitlement, and suing her own daughter. 3 major clients cut ties within weeks. Her phone stopped ringing, and her carefully curated image as the respectable, trustworthy professional shattered overnight. The fallout didn't end there. At a family barbecue hosted by Ron's side of the family, a gathering Sarah almost skipped, she dropped one more truth bomb. Surrounded by cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends, she calmly mentioned that she had been recording her conversations with Linda. And then, in front of everyone, she played a clip. Linda's own voice, dripping with manipulation, saying the words, "You have no choice, Sarah. Family means you pay for Marcus. If you don't, I'll make you." The silence that followed was deafening. You could see the shock ripple through the crowd, the realization sinking in that Sarah hadn't been exaggerating. She had proof. Cold, undeniable proof. And with that one recording, Linda's credibility crumbled. Extended family members who had once parroted Linda's guilt trips now turned on her. Cousins who had kept their distance from Sarah reached out privately to apologize, admitting they had believed the lies for too long. Meanwhile, Marcus's fantasy life imploded. The foreclosure notice turned final, and he was forced to move back in with his parents, tail between his legs. No more granite countertops, no more day trading with other people's money. For the first time in his life, he had to clock in at a real job. Home Depot, stocking shelves and answering questions about power drills. Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't even need to. Watching Marcus actually work for once was victory enough. Linda, on the other hand, had to do something she never imagined: explain herself. Explain to extended relatives why she sued her own daughter. Explain to her shrinking client base why her name was now tied to stories of fraud and manipulation. There's no easy way to spin. I tried to force my daughter to pay her stepbrother's mortgage into something respectable. And Sarah? She walked away freer than she had ever been. No guilt, no obligations, no more playing the role of the family cash cow. She had exposed the truth, defeated the lawsuit, and dismantled the house of cards her mother had built. And the beauty of it all, the justice wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic fireworks, it was steady, relentless consequences that left no room for denial. The legal karma, absolute chef's kiss. And if you love seeing entitled people brought down by cold, hard reality, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because trust me, you're not going to want to miss what comes next. When the dust finally settled, when the shouting stopped and the legal papers were signed, the wreckage of Linda's war lay in plain sight. And let me tell you, it wasn't Sarah's life that lay in ruins. Linda, who had once strutted through family gatherings like a queen certain of her throne, now walked with the limp of someone who had overplayed her hand. The lawsuit, her grand masterpiece of manipulation, was dead. Not only had it been thrown out, but it had drained her of $8,000 in legal fees. $8,000 gone. Money she could have used for her business, her retirement, her household. Instead, it had been burned in an attempt to weaponize guilt against her own daughter. And in the end, the only lesson Linda learned was that the courts don't enforce emotional blackmail. Marcus's life took its own humbling turn. Gone were the granite countertops and the fantasy of being a consultant who never consulted with anyone about anything. The foreclosure was finalized, and his shiny suburban dream house was stripped from him like a costume at the end of a play. With nowhere else to go, he packed his belongings and slunk back into his parents' basement, surrounded by the same four walls he had grown up in. The difference now, he couldn't lounge his days away in excuses and empty promises. Bills needed paying. Reality needed facing. And for the first time in his life, Marcus had to clock in, punch out, and earn his keep. The local Home Depot became his stage. Orange apron, name tag and all. Customers asked him about lumber dimensions and lawnmowers instead of hearing about his next business venture. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And slowly, painfully slowly, Marcus started to grow up. Ron, the eternal bystander, surprised everyone in the aftermath. 4 years, he had been Switzerland, neutral, quiet, enabling by silence. But when he watched his wife hemorrhage $8,000 chasing a vendetta against her daughter, something inside him snapped. For the first time in his marriage, he stood up to Linda. He told her flat out that their financial recklessness had to end. No more draining their retirement. No more refinancing their house for Marcus's failures. No more lawsuits born of bruised pride. Whether or not Linda truly listened was another story, but the simple fact that Ron had finally raised his voice showed just how far the ground had shifted. And what about Sarah, the woman at the center of the storm? She walked out not as a victim, not even as just a survivor, but as the victor. The money she refused to bleed into Marcus's mortgage became the foundation for her own dreams. With that $50,000 she had fought to protect, she placed a down payment on her own house, a beautiful, modern home that reflected not her family's chaos, but her own discipline, her own sacrifice, her own triumph. Every brick, every piece of furniture, every square foot screamed one message: this is mine. Earned, not stolen. Built, not begged. But perhaps the sweetest victory wasn't the house. It was the peace that followed. Sarah established boundaries so sharp they could cut. No more guilt-laced phone calls dragging her into financial crises. No more subtle interrogations about her salary or her savings. She made it clear She would engage with family only on her own terms. And those who respected her boundaries found themselves closer to her than ever before. Extended relatives, who had once bought into Linda's sob stories, now saw Sarah clearly for who she was, the responsible one, the one with courage, the one who had broken free of a cycle that could have lasted decades. Cousins who had kept their distance began reaching out, offering apologies, admiration, and in some cases, genuine friendship. Through it all, Sarah learned a hard but priceless truth. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do isn't to give in. It isn't to save. It isn't to bail out or prop up. Sometimes, the most loving act is to refuse. To let people feel the weight of their choices. To let them stumble so they can learn how to stand. She had wanted a family that stood together, but she discovered that enabling destruction isn't love, it's sabotage. And real love, the kind that lasts, sometimes means saying, no. Enough. Today, her life looks nothing like the battlefield she once trudged across. Her relationship with Linda and Ron? Limited. Civil, when necessary, but no longer open doors for manipulation. With Marcus, surprisingly cordial. The man who once called her selfish now keeps his head down, working shifts and finally contributing to his own life. There are no deep sibling bonds, no miraculous reunion, but there is something resembling respect. And for Sarah, that's enough. Most importantly, she thrives. Her career has taken off. Her savings are hers alone, and her new home is filled not with ghosts of guilt, but with laughter, quiet, and the steady hum of a life lived on her terms. The war is over. The scars remain, yes, but so does the strength. And Sarah knows, with unshakable certainty, that she will never again be anyone's cash cow, scapegoat, or emotional hostage. Because she chose herself. And in the end, that was the most important choice of all. And that, my friends, is how Sarah broke free from a cycle of manipulation that could have drained her for decades. By refusing to be the family ATM, she didn't just protect her savings account, she forced everyone around her to finally face reality. Linda had to face the humiliation of her own recklessness, Marcus had to face the consequences of his laziness, and even Ron had to face the truth that silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. One woman's no shifted an entire family dynamic. But let's pause and really think about this. Was Sarah right to let Marcus lose his home? Should she have stepped in, if only to keep peace at the table during Thanksgiving dinner? Or is there a point where enabling becomes cruelty, not kindness? Because this is the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes supporting family doesn't mean handing them money. Sometimes the only way they'll ever grow is if you step back and let the ground give way beneath them. It's a tough question, and I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Would you have written the check, kept the house afloat, and told yourself it was just this once? Or would you have stood your ground, the way Sarah did, and let the chips fall where they may? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. I'll be reading every single one, because this is a discussion that touches way more people than you'd think. And hey, if you think Sarah handled this perfectly, if you think her calm, calculated refusal deserves a standing ovation, smash that like button right now. It's one small way to show that you believe in standing up to entitled family members, no matter how much they scream, cry, or guilt trip. While you're at it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because here at DR Family Tales, we dive deep into the wildest, rawest stories of family drama, betrayal, and ultimate justice. If you love Sarah's story, trust me, you're not going to want to miss what's coming next. In fact, let me give you a little tease. Next week, we're covering a jaw-dropping saga about a mother-in-law who tried to steal her daughter-in-law's inheritance. And let's just say, the revenge that followed didn't just expose her, it left her homeless. You'll want to be here for that one. And one more thing, this channel isn't just about me telling stories. It's about you. Do you have a story about an entitled parent, a manipulative sibling, or a toxic relative who finally got what they deserved? Drop it in the comments below. We might just feature your tale in an upcoming video. Imagine hearing your own story told back to you, with the entire internet cheering for your victory. Because remember this, family isn't just about blood. Blood makes you related, but respect, boundaries, and mutual support, that's what makes you family. And if someone can't honor that, then maybe, just maybe, the most loving thing you can do is walk away. So until next time, stay strong, keep your boundaries high, and never let anyone guilt you out of the life you've built. This is DR Family Tales, signing off.